Ira Tobolowsky, a prominent 68-year-old Dallas attorney, woke up on the morning of May 13, 2016, just like he did every workday. He got out of bed quietly, trying not to disturb his wife, and he headed out to the garage to leave. His wife, Debbie, was startled shortly thereafter as the couple's home security system screeched a warning that a fire was blazing in the garage. Emergency services responded, only to find Ira's lifeless body in the ashes. It's been nearly 9 years since this brutal murder, and though someone was indicted for the crime, those charges have since been dropped and this case remains unsolved. Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laureles was shot execution style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and coworkers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information, because we strongly believe all lives matter. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement podcast and Justice for Leon Laureles. And now you can also find us on YouTube. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
2016 was a chaotic year from start to finish. The Syrian civil war entered its 6th year, with over 400,000 people dead and 5 million displaced. The UK voted to leave the European Union. The Zika virus spread throughout many parts of the world. The water crisis in Flint, Michigan made headlines. And despite losing the popular vote, Donald Trump was elected the next U.S. president. The world lost a number of cultural icons in 2016. Alan Rickman, David Bowie, Prince, Gene Wilder, Muhammad Ali, Carrie Fisher, and George Michael all passed away. Rio hosted the Summer Olympics with Simone Biles, Usain Bolt, Katie Ledecky, and Michael Phelps dominating their respective fields. Beyoncé released Lemonade, which was recently praised by Rolling Stone magazine as the #1 album of the 21st century so far. The week of May 13, 2016, Designer by Panda was #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and Dierks Bentley topped the country charts with Somewhere on a Beach. Captain America Civil War was #1 at the box office that week. The Last Mile by David Baldacci topped the New York Times bestseller list for fiction, and Anderson Cooper and Gloria Vanderbilt topped the nonfiction charts with The Rainbow Comes and Goes. We've covered the history and background of Dallas in depth in previous episodes, but we'll touch a little on what was happening there in 2016. The Metroplex continued to grow, reaching a population of 1.3 million people in Dallas proper and 7.2 million people in the DFW Metroplex as a whole. Frontier Communications, Toyota, Liberty Mutual, and State Farm all relocated major North American offices to Dallas, bringing in new jobs and fresh faces and contributing to the diverse cultural landscape found throughout the city.
Ira Edwin Tobolowsky was born on November 17, 1947, to Jack and Josephine Tobolowsky in Dallas, Texas, and he grew up in the Preston Hollow neighborhood. He graduated from Hillcrest High School in 1965, Southern Methodist University in 1968, and then SMU Law School in 1970. He started practicing law in 1971 as one of the youngest lawyers ever admitted to the bar in Texas history, and he continued to practice for the next 45 years. He argued in front of the Supreme Court, and he was regularly recognized for his commitment to ethics and professionalism. Ira and his wife, Debbie, had been married for 39 years at the time of his death, and they had 3 sons, Jonathan, Michael, and Zachary, 2 of whom now practice law themselves today. His family and friends remember him as a loyal, generous man with many friends and a large, loving family. Every interview and description I've seen of the man indicates that he was highly respected and deeply loved. He always had a smile on his face and gave people and tasks his full attention despite usually being in tremendous physical pain due to a spinal condition. His death sent a shockwave through the community. If someone as decent and loving as Ira could be murdered in broad daylight on his own property, was anyone really safe? On the morning of May 13th, 2016, Ira got up and quietly got ready for work, as he always did, carefully not to disturb his sleeping wife, Debbie. Debbie heard a security system arm itself as Ira left through the back door and headed to the garage around 7:15 a.m. But she lingered in bed, having stayed up late the night before, helping the couple's oldest son finalize the details for their rehearsal dinner for his upcoming wedding. Debbie got up and got moving about a half hour later, but the home security system alarm interrupted her routine, alerting her to a fire. Debbie saw smoke in the backyard and opened the back door to see the garage ablaze. Emergency services responded, and Debbie gave them the garage door opener. Panicked, Debbie called Ira's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. With a sickening realization, Debbie asked a firefighter how many cars were in the garage. The firefighter reported that there were 2 cars inside, and Debbie's worst fears were confirmed. Firefighters had to break down the garage door to get in, but it was too late. Ira had perished in the fire.
One of the people who responded to the fire was homicide detective Scott Sayers. Debbie was shocked when Sayers asked her whether or not she thought the fire might have been set deliberately. After all, Ira was a well-regarded man in Dallas. Who would want to hurt him? Sayers took a look around and then allowed Dallas Fire Rescue to take the lead on the investigation. The problem with crimes involving fire, obviously, is that fire has a tendency to destroy all the evidence. And then the means to use to put out the fire can damage or destroy evidence as well. Firefighters are trained to use the least destructive measures possible to put out fires so they can preserve evidence, but that's not always feasible. The main priority is putting out the fire and minimizing damage to surrounding structures. Fire department investigators surveyed the scene and started sorting through evidence very quickly. Ira's body was found on the floor of the garage on the driver's side of his own car. He had walked into the garage, walked past Debbie's car, and then made it to his own car before succumbing to whatever had caused his death. Keep in mind that at this point in time, this was not yet a murder investigation. Dallas Fire Rescue was simply investigating the cause of the blaze. They searched for the source of the fire on Ira's person and in the immediate vicinity of the body.
I remember reading that at one point, investigators wondered if his phone had caught fire and ignited some flammable substance nearby. This may sound silly to some listeners in 2025, and it did to me too at first, but then I remembered that this happened around the same time period when one of the Samsung phone models had a faulty battery that would literally catch fire. So it's not an unreasonable consideration. Just in case someone looks up information on this story and comes across those statements and thinks it's crazy.
That's a good point, and I had completely forgotten about that, honestly. I'm a Samsung person, and I remember flying around that same time. Security was examining every Samsung phone to make sure it wasn't that particular model. In any case, that didn't seem to be the issue in this instance. So investigators kept searching, coming up with nothing until they discovered a plastic juice bottle tucked between some boxes in the back of the garage. The label on the bottle had been stripped off, and there were a few ounces of what appeared to be gasoline inside. Debbie confirmed that there was no good reason for a plastic jug of gasoline to be in the couple's garage. Ira's spinal condition meant he couldn't operate lawnmowers or any other heavy equipment that might need gas. With that, Dallas Fire Rescue determined that this fire was intentionally set, and Dallas Homicide returned to the scene.
But not before concerned neighbors, friends, and relatives tracked all over the property at the crime scene. Fire investigators didn't cordon off the scene right away. Investigators started questioning Debbie and other bystanders, asking if Ira had enemies. He was a lawyer, and there was a list of people he'd angered or beaten in court. But that's par for the course when you're a trial attorney. Investigators narrowed the list pretty quickly. One man in particular raised eyebrows. Stephen Aubrey, a resident of Austin and the son of one of Ira's clients. As law enforcement started looking into Stephen Aubrey, the medical examiner determined that Ira had been beaten, set on fire, and died from a combination of blunt force trauma, burns, and smoke inhalation. Now, it was abundantly clear that this was intentional, and investigators started building their case against Stephen Aubrey. Ira represented Stephen Aubrey's mother, Betsy, in a legal battle over the Aubrey estate. We'll back up just a bit. Betsy Aubrey and Stephen's older brother, Buck, managed the family's estate after Stephen's father died, and he was not happy about it. Stephen accused his brother of stealing money, and it devolved into a vicious fight that Stephen referred to as jihad. Betsy Aubrey eventually became afraid of Stephen, got tired of the constant fighting, and had him removed from her will. At one point, she told a relative, quote, "He has absolutely gone crazy and is on a rampage like no other."
Unfortunately, this all just made everything worse. Stephen wrote his mother an email shortly after she disinherited him, and it's unhinged. Basically, he gave her 3 days to change her mind and apologize, or else. And I quote, "I will make it my mission to make the rest of your life miserable, as you deserve. Everyone you have ever known will know what has happened and the poor choices you have made," end quote. He ended the email with, quote, "You should never have had children."
Brutal. I read through the email, and it's definitely a lot. I don't know how much of it to believe. Stephen definitely had a problem with the way his mother and brother were handling his father's estate, but we really only have his side of the story. Again, Stephen accused his brother of stealing money, called him lazy and fat and an idiot, that kind of a thing. I have no idea if any of the accusations Stephen made in that email are true, and it really doesn't matter. Estate disputes bring out the worst in people sometimes, and this is one of the most extreme examples I've ever seen.
Betsy stood her ground and refused to cave to Stephen's demands. 2 weeks after Betsy received this email, someone broke into her home and stole nothing but a couple of pieces of artwork that had sentimental value to her. Whoever broke into the house also let loose several rats. It was well known amongst family and friends that Betsy was terrified of rats, so this is pretty clearly personal. Betty suspected Stephen right away, but he of course denied any involvement. By this point, Betsy and Stephen's brother Buck were completely fed up, and they got a judge to issue peace bonds forbidding Stephen to contact them for a year. A peace bond is basically a restraining order, but it's for instances where someone has been threatened or their property has been threatened, but there hasn't been any actual harm or action yet. It's issued by a justice of the peace. Stephen called the JP who issued the bonds a lesbian and filed another lawsuit against his mother. Apparently, lesbian is an insult.
And this is where Ira comes in. Betsy Aubrey hired Ira after this latest spat with her son. Ira first came in contact with Stephen Aubrey in August of 2014 at a deposition in Dallas. Stephen represented himself, and Ira was absolutely relentless from the get-go, barely letting Stephen get a word in edgewise. 2 weeks after this deposition, Stephen Aubrey filed a lawsuit against Ira and attempted to get a restraining order against him, which was denied. Stephen Aubrey spiraled out of control and launched a smear campaign against Ira, which included sending emails with anti-Semitic messages. Ira was Jewish. I'm not sure if we mentioned that already, and blasting out libelous nonsense and doctored photos of Ira on various blogs, going so far as to accuse Ira of joining ISIS. Stephen Aubrey accused Ira of representing known pedophiles, having an affair with the CEO of the Dallas Morning News. He accused him of committing mortgage fraud and accused him of witness tampering. Ira's son Michael said that he dealt with nasty people in the past, but this was a whole different level of evil and spite, and the stress of the ordeal was starting to take a toll on his health, and it was really beginning to affect his attitude. Ira was very much a buckle down and work through it kind of guy, but Michael could tell the stress was getting to him. He was tired. His pain was worse. He needed help doing basic tasks. Just a few days before Ira was supposed to face Stephen in another deposition, Stephen non-suited his case, which is exactly what it sounds like. He dropped the matter and changed his mind.
Ira wasn't fooled, however. He figured Stephen Aubrey wasn't going to just slink away and never to be heard from again. And he'd also done some damage to Ira's reputation and business through his slanderous blogs and doctored photos. So Ira enlisted the help of a colleague and filed a defamation suit against Stephen in August of 2015. Stephen found the help of his partner, Brian Vidica, who is apparently an attorney himself. Ira named Brian the co-defendant in the defamation suit. At the same time, Ira had a duty to his client, Betsy Aubrey. Ira wanted to try and make sure that Stephen couldn't attack her or drag her to court again, so he had a judge declare Stephen a vexatious litigant in early 2016. And it's not like this was Ira or Betsy being petty. Over a 2-year period, Stephen had filed 7 lawsuits against his mother, Betsy. He'd also sued her lawyers, her accountant, and 3 judges. If he couldn't get what he wanted, he'd just file in a different court. Along with being forbidden from suing his mother, his brother, or Ira without getting written approval from Dallas County, Stephen was on the hook for $250,000 in sanctions. In addition to being rebuffed by the court system, Stephen and his partner had been involved in another lawsuit in Austin. They lost their swanky house, they lost their life savings in a Ponzi scheme, so things were spiraling out of control for him.
Ira proceeded with his defamation suit against Stephen and his partner, and it went about as well as you can imagine, given the things we've already described here. At one deposition in March of 2016, Stephen's partner, Brian, who was supposed to be representing him, was completely out of it, seemingly so heavily medicated that he couldn't form a coherent sentence. Things got heated. Ira and his colleague ended the deposition, and eventually Ira threatened to call the police if Stephen and his partner didn't leave. Just about 6 weeks after that deposition, Ira was dead. And as we indicated earlier, investigators focused on Stephen Aubrey fairly quickly. At first, he declined to speak to investigators, though his partner Brian obliged. He denied that the juice bottle found in Ira's garage came from his and Stephen's house, and he complained that if this went to trial, Stephen would never get a fair trial because of the media coverage. Which to me seems like an odd thing to say, but then again, this guy is a lawyer. So maybe that's not a weird thing for a lawyer to say. I don't know. Stephen Aubrey did consent to a search of his car and electronic devices. That same day, Ira's family found a hole drilled through their fence, a hole that gave someone a full view of Ira's garage, large enough to allow whoever was watching to learn about Ira's morning routine as he left for work. This hole had also been painted over to make it look like a natural imperfection in the wood.
The next step was to get access to Stephen Aubrey's home. He had 2 apartments in Dallas, and both of them were searched. That search turned up a drill bits, and paint that looked similar to the paint around the hole in the Tobolowskys. Stephen's laptop had Google Maps searches for the Tobolowsky home and their synagogue, searches for burner phones, and searches on the legal definition of an alibi. Aubrey had also exchanged emails with an acquaintance the night of the murder asking how to deal with detectives. This series of emails included phrases that talked about throwing gasoline and ends with Aubrey's friend telling him not to kill anyone again. At Stephen's other apartment, investigators found propane torches and clothing with flammable residue on it. As incriminating as this all sounds, it wasn't enough to make an arrest, and Stephen and his partner moved to Florida. Stephen caught a prostitution charge in 2016, and he and his partner sued the parent company of the Dallas Morning News from Florida, but later dropped the lawsuit. They also filed a restraining order against Ira's son Michael, accusing him of stalking, but the request was denied. Michael Tobolowsky was not stalking or harassing Stephen Aubrey. Stephen also attempted to have his name legally changed, claiming that being associated with a high-profile murder was hurting his professional life.
What did he do for a living?
He is or was a massage therapist, but the judge overseeing his request denied it. Aubrey was deep in debt by this point, and the judge felt changing his name was a tactic to avoid his creditors.
In July of 2021, Ira's case was reassigned, and the new team looking at the case took the evidence to the DA, and the DA decided that there was enough for an arrest. Aubrey was taken into custody in Florida in April of 2022, held in Broward County on $2 million bail, and then extradited to Texas, where he was indicted for Ira's murder. But that's not where the story ends, as this is a podcast about unsolved cases. Indictments aren't the end of the road by any stretch of the imagination. If you've been around the true crime world long enough, you've probably heard the phrase, "You can indict a ham sandwich," which basically just means it's not difficult to indict someone. In front of a grand jury, the accused doesn't have a defense attorney. There's no cross-examination of witnesses, no judge to oversee the proceedings, just a handful of your peers deciding whether or not to formally accuse you of a crime. Stephen Aubrey sat in a Dallas County jail for 625 days while a legal drama played out in real life. In January of 2024, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office filed an order to dismiss the capital murder charge against Aubrey, stating that they were unable to make a case that met the threshold for trial. Though we don't have any more explanation than that, and in true Stephen Aubrey fashion, he turned around and sued one of the detectives who investigated his case, along with one of the prosecutors involved and the Florida judge who presided over the proceedings right after his arrest, stating that his arrest was based on misleading and falsified information. In the suit, Aubrey accused now retired Detective Brian Fillingham of leaving out exculpatory information in the affidavit used to create the warrant for his arrest. Fillingham went on the record after the suit was filed, saying that he went by the book and that everything he laid out in the affidavit was backed by evidence.
And to be fair, professional written products of this nature go through multiple quality control checks, and then it has to be reviewed by a judge before a warrant can be issued. Nothing raised any concerns. And while I know it's a low bar, Aubrey was indicted by a grand jury.
Aubrey also claimed that he never sent any anti-Semitic emails to Ira or leave any harassing voicemails, that his dermatologist never saw burn injuries on the day Ira was killed, as the affidavit for the arrest warrant stated, and that wood found in his drill bits did not match the wood from the Tobolowsky's fence. And as far as I know, there's been no resolution to that lawsuit at this point. But we do need to back up a few years and talk about one of the other lawsuits that comes into play in this case. At the time of his death, Ira was embroiled in a defamation lawsuit filed against Stephen Aubrey. Remember, Aubrey called Ira an ISIS butcher, used anti-Semitic language towards him, and attempted to smear his name and destroy his reputation as an attorney. Ira was murdered before the suit could be resolved, but his family pursued the case in 2017. They firmly believed that Stephen had a hand in Ira's death, and they wanted some measure of justice at this point. Aubrey was a person of interest, but had not been arrested yet. Aubrey and his partner had moved to Florida by this time, and they claimed they could not afford to return to Dallas for the court proceedings. So the proceedings continued without the co-defendants or the original plaintiff, Ira. In his closing statement, the attorney representing the Tobolowsky family asked the judge for $500,000 for mental anguish and damage to Ira's professional reputation. The judge took it many steps further, awarding the Tobolowsky family $5.5 million for their troubles. Aubrey and his partner have claimed to be indigent and are deep in the hole with other judgments and court costs, so there is little chance the Tobolowsky family will ever see a dime. But that's not the point. It's a small measure of justice in a case that seems cut and dried, but is still considered unsolved.
Ira's middle son eventually took over his law practice, and the family has attempted to move on, though there will never truly be any closure, no matter how much time passes, even if another arrest is made and the perpetrator is brought to justice. The statement that time heals all wounds is patently false, at least when loved ones are the victim of heinous, unjustifiable crimes. For whatever reason, this case was particularly difficult for me to finish. For 6 weeks, I agonized over the details, partly because it seemed like each article I read linked me to another one with yet another unbelievable twist. It was like watching a movie or a gritty crime series unfold in front of me. The fact that it was real life and that a loving family was caught between a criminal investigation and a civil suit involving their lost loved one made this particularly difficult. We cover a lot of frankly insane things on this podcast, but this one was just hard.
This is an incredibly tough one for me as well. I have personal experience dealing with the unsolved murder of a loved one, and I know what the family's going through. But as of March 2025, the murder of 68-year-old Ira Tobolowsky in his Dallas garage is still considered unsolved. This case is still very much active, and we will certainly provide updates if and when an arrest is ever made, and if any new information concerning the man originally charged with Ira's murder comes out. If you have any information on the murder of Ira Tobolowsky, please contact the Dallas Crime Stoppers tip line at 214-373-TIPS. We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network.
Are you looking for your next true crime podcast? Do you crave stories that have mystery and suspense? Well, look no further. Introducing Love and Murder, the podcast that dives deep into the world of relationships gone horribly wrong. Every week, I take you on a journey through the dark side of love, where passion turns into obsession, family becomes enemies, and romance turns to murder. So why should you listen to Love and Murder? Because this is not just another true crime podcast. We're your partners in crime, your storytellers, and your weekly dose of suspenseful entertainment. So what are you waiting for? Join the LAM community, www.murderandlove.com. That's Love and Murder backwards, murderandlove.com. See you soon.
Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and guest. If you think bringing unsolved cases is important, then please take a moment to rate and review our podcast. Also, please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement Podcasts and Justice for Leon Laurelis. You can now also find us on YouTube. If you like what you hear, please do us a favor and subscribe. It would help so much, my lovelies. Also, please share this episode so we can bring awareness to these lesser-known cases so we can reach more people in hopes that someone who may know something will come forward. I'd also like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org. This podcast has a bigger purpose than just providing information and entertainment. The Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act is a bipartisan bill that was signed into law by Congress in 2021, and we want to see it put into action. This law establishes a systematic process for reviewing case files related to cold case murders. The focus is on providing a mechanism for the families and friends of murder victims to request a formal review of such cases.